Karen has Tom drive her back to Jack Calvin's office on his way to work the next morning. Luckily, Calvin was able to fit her in. Tom has an important meeting that he cannot miss and cannot stay, or so he says. Karen wonders if maybe he can't deal with any more of this, or doesn't want to. Or perhaps he thinks she'll be more forthcoming with the lawyer if he's not there, but she's not going to tell the lawyer any more than she's told her husband. She just wants to know what she should do. Tom leans over and kisses her on the cheek when he drops her off, but he doesn't meet her eyes. She tells him she'll take a cab home. She stands in the parking lot for a moment, watching her husband drive away. Then she turns and walks towards the building. Once inside, she hesitates for a moment in front of the elevators, but then she presses the button. When she arrives at the lawyer's office, she swallows her fear, opens the door, and walks in. She has a longer wait this time, and her nerves begin to get the better of her. When she's finally ushered in to see Jack Calvin, she can feel the tension in her shoulders, her neck. "You're back," the lawyer says cheerfully. "So soon. Does this mean you've remembered something?" He smiles at her. She doesn't return his smile and sits down. "What can I help you with?" Calvin says, now all business. "I still don't remember anything about that night," Karen tells him. She imagines what he must think. He probably thinks she's here to tell him something she couldn't tell him in front of her husband, about some sordid affair she's conducting on the rough side of town. She will have to disappoint him. "Tom has a meeting this morning that he can't miss," she says. He nods politely. "Everything I tell you is protected by attorney-client privilege, correct?" Karen asks, looking him directly in the eye. "Yes." She swallows and says, "The police paid me a visit yesterday." "Okay. I thought it was about the accident." "It wasn't?" "No," she pauses. "They're investigating a murder." The lawyer's eyebrows go up, his eyes sharpen. He takes a fresh pad of lined yellow paper from his desk drawer, grabs an expensive-looking pen off his blotter, and says calmly, "You'd better tell me everything." "It was horrible," she chokes on the last word. She feels nauseated, remembering the photographs of the corpse. She can feel her hands trembling in her lap and squeezes them together. "They showed us photographs of the body." She quickly tells him about the detective's visit. "I didn't recognize the dead man," she says. She watches the lawyer closely, hoping he will somehow be able to save her. "You were speeding, running red lights, not far from where a murder took place, possibly around the time the murder occurred," Calvin says. "I can see why they might want to talk to you." He leans forward, his chair squeaking at the movement. "But is there anything else to tie you to that crime? Because unless there's something else, there's nothing to worry about. That's a dicey area. It has nothing to do with you, does it?" She feels herself swallow again. She looks at him, steadies herself, and tells him the rest. "They found some gloves." He stares at her with sharp eyes, waiting. "Go on," he says. She takes a deep breath and says, "They found some rubber gloves in a parking lot near the murder." She hesitates, then adds, "I'm pretty sure they're mine." The lawyer stares at her. "Our rubber gloves are missing," she pauses. "I don't know what happened to them. They're quite distinctive, pink, with a flowered pattern near the top." "Did you tell them you were missing some gloves?" Calvin asks. She could tell from his tone how incredibly dumb he thinks that would be. "I'm not that stupid," she says tartly. "Good, that's good," he says, obviously relieved. "Tom lied for me," she says. She could feel her mask of composure slipping. He told them we weren't missing any rubber gloves, but they could tell he was lying. "Rule of thumb," the lawyer says, "don't lie to the police. Don't say anything. Better yet, call me. She says they said they don't need to prove those gloves were mine because apparently my car ran over them in the parking lot and they have tire track evidence, so they can put me, or my car at least, near the murder scene. They have evidence. Calvin looks back at her, his face grave. Who's the detective on that anyway? Who figured that out? His name is Detective Rosbach, Karen says. Rosbach, Calvin says, looking thoughtfully. I don't know what to do, Karen says in a low voice. They were all over my street last night, the detectives talking to the neighbors. The lawyer leans forward intently and fixes his eyes on her. You do nothing. You don't talk to them. If they want to talk to you, you call me. He takes another one of his business cards, turns it over, and writes a number on the back. Use this number if you can't get me at the others. You'll always be able to get me at this one. She takes the card from him gratefully. Do you think they have enough to charge me? She asks anxiously. Not from what you've told me. You were in a parking lot near a building where a murder was committed, possibly around the time of the murder. You were speeding and had an accident. You might have seen something, that's all. The question is, what else did they find? I don't know, she says nervously. I still can't remember anything about that night. Calvin takes a minute and scribbles some notes. Finally, he looks up at her and says, I hate to mention this, but I'll need a bigger retainer, just in case. Just in case she's charged with murder, Karen thinks. She fumbles in her purse for a checkbook. I have to ask, Calvin says quietly. Why might you have had a pair of rubber gloves with you? She deliberately avoids his gaze. Searching in her purse for a checkbook, she says, I have no idea.